So actually today I was asked to present my report in English. So I hope that all the Russian speakers will get a good translation, as we tried to compare it already before my presentation. So first of all, I would like to thank the arrangers of the conference for presenting me and giving me the possibility to perform such a report. And my theme is the stages of the iconic turn on the examples of the Russian photography, especially pre-war. And I'm going to stick to the paper because as I have quite a limited amount of time, and I think that I will also have the questions given later, yes, after the last speakers. So, the iconic turn is a global historical cultural phenomenon which describes the fundamental shift from the text-based to the visual-based culture. The phenomenon was very much affected by the invention and the dynamic development of the new mechanical visual technologies of self-expression. In this case, photography, being one of the first such visual technologies, became the field of practical exploration of the new visual specifics at the turn of the 19th century, which were relatively clearly understood by the post-structuralist philosophy only at the end of the 20th century. The Russian photographic heritage of the end of the 19th and first third of the 20th century provides rich materials to describe the stages of evolution of the new visual media concepts. It is especially useful for uncovering the phases of photographic discourse transformation under the increasing pressure of the governmental ideology. Using examples from the Russian photographic history, it is possible to describe the phenomenon of a simultaneous existence of competing visual concepts, such as documentalism, the pictorialism, the Soviet avant-garde, and the socialist realism. The invention and the further active application of the photographic technology influenced a lot the human principles of interacting with the visual artifacts. Due to its nature, based on the laws of natural sciences, photography was not from the very beginning considered to be a means of arranging direct and supposedly objective visual communication. Photography was supposed to become a source of precise visual projections of the actual three-dimensional objects, free from subjective intervention. In the traditional visual technologies, such as painting and graphics, the artist's intervention inevitably caused the loss of precision in depicting actual proportions and visualization. This was a result of the specifics of the human perception, especially the process of selecting essential elements and generalizing visual, harmonizing and rationalizing it for the sake of storing it in memory. The photographic images, on the contrary, were to breach the barriers of the human nature's limits and to provide the new, much more transparent way of connection the human mind with transparent actuality. And I state here that it's actuality, not reality. So I mean actuality connected with the real world and the reality transformed in our human mind, how we understand. However, it should be taken into consideration that such a concept stated the laws of the physics and chemistry to be the unquestionable and the only fundamentals of photography. As a result, photography was understood as a new and nearly perfect extraction of the human perceptive organs, also capable of storing memory, which was ought to satisfy the growing needs of this civilization in the precise visual age on the industrial scale. Keeping in mind the previous statements, photography was at the same time the catalyst and the reaction on the complicated process of human perception's evolution, which is also referred to as the iconic turn. From the perspective of the spiral model of the historical process, the iconic turn can be described as a cyclical phenomenon, which had already transformed the cultural environment of the Western Europe region, being the main target of this research, at least several times. It should be also underlined that the iconic turns symptomatically marked the turning stages of human history, which were closely connected with the formation of a new and the stagnation of the old fundamental paradigms and ideologies, and later causing changes of the governmental level. In the sphere of culture and art, such systematical fluctuations resulted in the cyclical changes of phases of classical approaches, such as based on the documentation of just one refined concept, and the phases of non-classical approaches, for which, on the contrary, it was typical to include several competing concepts, coexisting simultaneously and causing a lot of imaginal, philosophical, and cultural experiments. During the time span of the second half of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the iconic turn was at the same time the reaction and the transforming power of the global process concerned with the shift of the human civilization from the modern to the contemporary history, which differed from each other, firstly, by the crucial increase of speed of globalization, with the systematization and the unification of the social and cultural environments. The processes mentioned were marked both by the critical borderline achieved in the fields of natural sciences and the increase of the amount of information needed to be urgently supplied to the society. The newest breakthroughs in the natural sciences were accompanied by the formation of the philosophical concepts, which pushed away the older models of thinking and behavior. Considering these specifics, the sphere of visual culture became a sort of a central linked link in the general chain of historical events. It was in the field of visual culture where the new types of technological visual artifacts had been created, the earliest of which being of the photographic origin. These, the very visual artifacts, were used to attempt to find a new way of exchanging information, which had to require less material and mental resources, and to provide data of unprecedented precision. This new way of communication, based on the visual artifacts, was supposed to resolve the fundamental dilemma, which was, on the one hand, to significantly increase the amount of information provided, growing both in quantity and in quality, and then, on the other hand, to maintain and even increase the level of accessibility and the comprehensibility of the information for the general public. Photography actually became the first visual technology which was capable enough to provide a relatively effective solution of this problem shown. The usage of the mechanized devices for the creation of the visual artifacts caused the increase of the potential truthfulness of the visual information and the coherent diminishing of the human factor, while providing the possibility of sparing time and other resources. Even at the beginning of this evolution, in the middle of the 20th century, photography became accessible nearly to anybody, just in a matter of some decades, which meant it became used both for scientific and creative reasons. Photography not only spread in the very far regions of the globe, it also made it possible to break the limits of space and time itself. By means of photography, it became possible not only to capture and depict the most tiny and the most faraway objects in extreme detail. It became for the first time possible to compare highly precise images of two or more objects remaining on the greater distance from each other. The previous speaker told us that he gave absolutely new experience, and actually the transformation of artistic culture and art history actually began on the emphasis of photographic images. In this case, the invention and the practice of photography had a huge impact on the nearly all spheres of the human life, not only deepening knowledge on the already existing fields, but also providing completely new data and experience, both for scientific and for cultural analysis. In the process of developing the photographic theory in practice, it became evident that the photographic visual artifacts are somewhat completely new, not just for more technical advance and quicker to produce analogs of traditional visual artifacts. The more of the photographic artifacts were connected with the transcendent world, the less they were controlled by the human principles of dealing with actuality. In context of the iconic turn, it became clear in the late 19th century that the photographic artifacts depict the actuality in its chaotic, non-devised, and illogical state that was surpassing the limits of the human understanding and ignoring the human categories of rationality, sense, generalization, and division. From this point of view, photography was not only less simple, but even less comprehensible for the human perceptive mechanism. However, even though such a fundamental opposition of photography and of the human mind had been uncovered, the photographic artifacts began not only to fill the visual vacuum, which existed early in several spheres of life, but it also began to compete and push away the traditional visual artifacts. As a result, being comparatively cheaper and supposedly easier to produce. This visual expansion of photography should be considered as an essential part of the general process of getting rid of the handmade technologies and tools from the human activities, and also as an important stage in context of the fundamental process of the humanity, surpassing the limits of the human body and mind by means of introducing mechanized tools and body extensions. In such a case, photography should be understood as a means of surpassing the limits of the human subjective perception that made this available by means of surpassing and even rejecting the basic human specifics of thinking. During this early phase of the iconic turn, when the goal of the introducing photography was to satisfy the needs of the society in massive quantities of precise images, photography became a field of analysis for the scholars and the practitioners of the spheres of culture and ideology. In this sense, photography became broadly applied in the fields of art and governmental policy as a powerful tool with many innovative benefits. It should be taken into consideration that due to the chronological connection of the iconic turn with the global historical shift, the fields of the visual culture and art in general, and of photography in particular, became more and more influenced by this external governmental pressure. It was already in the turn of the 19th century when photography significantly increased its role as a means of transforming and even creating realities of social existence due to its benefit of speed and convincing power. One of the first photographers in the Russian Empire to use photography as a creative tool was Andrei Karelin. In 1870s, 1880s, he produced several issues of the artistic album of photography taken from nature, which closely followed the contemporary concept of academic painting. This example demonstrates the artist's intention to depict traditional genre motifs typical for painting by means of using a scientific reconstruction of the event. Even though Karelin's works are highly detailed and precise, they remain completely painterly by its nature. I would like to remind once again that one of the important projects in the history of Russian culture involving photography was the one created by the photographer Pierre-Ambroise Rochefort, who accompanied the famous French writer Théophile Gautier in his trip to the Russian Empire. This project, which I'll just remind you in 1 minute, and the trip itself was sanctioned by and funded in 1857 by the Russian Emperor, and its goal was to achieve several specific results in the field of foreign affairs. The result of the project was the written work by Gautier expressing his positive experience of visiting Russia, and the publication of the album, The Treasures of the Old and the New Russia, illustrated by the photographic prints. This project was to become written, and what is more important, a visual disapproval of the point of view expressed by Marquis de Custine. I think you already heard a little more previously, and this project was very popular in Europe, and it was criticized. It criticized a lot of the Russian actual lifestyle. It was symptomatic that due to the global impact of the iconic turn, it became then specifically new mechanized images and photographic prints which were to prove, oppose, and mitigate the stated theoretical written concept. This also is a small reminder, and later we will of course proceed to the new material. One of the other outstanding examples of trying to achieve the same goals was the creative work by Ivan Bianchi, another foreigner on the Russian service, who produced photographic views of St. Petersburg in the second half of the 19th century, which were to demonstrate the practical application of the government concept of absolutism. So here is specifically the monument of Peter the Great, orthodoxy, and architecture and nation, which was applied in architecture. That's why the composition piece looks like this. The marked phenomenon of the intensive spread of photography was highly influenced by the great increase in the number of practitioners of photography after 1871, when Richard Leach Maddox introduced his newly invented dry gelatin silver process. The other side of the large-scale popularization and commercial success of photography was the inevitable decrease of the general quality of the photographic etiquette. In 1891, the first salon of art photography took place in Vienna, which presented a specifically selected exhibition of the photographic works claiming to satisfy the requirements to achieve the high status of the fine art. The Vienna salon differed a lot from the previous photographic exhibitions, as it was the first example of a photographic event where high requirements for the quality of the works to be selected were introduced, which resulted in a rejection of at least 2/3 of the works provided to the organizers of the salon. The evaluation of the works was done by the specific jury, which included representatives from the cultural high society, the art critics, whose goal was to draw the borderline between photographic art and applied photography. It was at the Vienna salon of art photography when the latest achievements of the new photographic art were shown, especially demonstrating the specific features of the visual concept of the pictorialism, drawing parallel between the art of photography and the traditional arts of painting and graphics. This work is not, of course, from the salon. It represents the concept of the pictorialism of one of the early Russian artists, the Mazuri. In context of the already approved concepts of the Impressionism, the main goal of the pictorial photography was to express the subjective emotions of the artist, a reason for which several techniques of manipulation with both the camera and the print were used, to surpass the starting basic naturalism of the photographic image. The pictorialism was the first systematic trend in photography, which applied the photographic potential to achieve goals other than precise visual documentation. The masters of the Russian photography, such as Mazuri, Petrov, Trapani, so here we see the work by Trapani, Grinberg, and others, took part in the global process of developing theory and practice of the pictorialism on different stages of its evolution, from the early stage of competing for the status of fine art photography, until the very stage of internal crisis of pictorial concept at the turn of the 1920s. At the very same time, when photography began to state itself as a means of artistic expression, it also strengthened considerably its role as a means of influencing the social life. Thanks to its highly naturalistic looks, and due to the breakthrough in the technological processes of replicating photographic images in press, photography began to become much more preferable in publishing, and much more preferable than the traditional hand-based technologies. So the last reminder that we will be having today is the work by Dmitriev, who was one of the most well-known Russian photographers of the late 19th century, who made the decision to change the actual social reality of his time by means of photographic projects. Dmitriev's famous album, The Drought Years, in 1891-92, in Nizhny Novgorod province, The Photographer's Taken from Nature, provided a serious positive impact on the amount and the quality of the help provided by the Russian authorities, and private donors to overcome the devastating results of the disastrous humanitarian cataclysm of the drought in the Volga. Dmitriev's creative work became an outstanding example of the phenomenon of photography, beginning to be used as an instrument to control, transform the life of the entire society. The next stage of the iconic turn in the area of photography started roughly from the 1920s, and it was different from the previous ones by the introduction and the systematic application of the specific selection of artistic means, typical for photographic visual nature. The members of the Soviet avant-garde cinematic and photographic movements, such as Vertov, Rodchenko, Ignatovich, and Van Gogh, played an important role in developing the concept of the new report photography by diversifying the creative process of photography with the introduction of such experimental means as the use of extreme vantage points, the diagonal composition, the active foreground, and the image cropping. The new Soviet artists considered photography to be one of the key visual technologies to transform the very principle of the human visual perception that was, from their point of view, crucial for the general process of creating the striking and new type of the Soviet city. As all the previous stages of the iconic turn, This stage was completely international, that it provided by specific features of the creative activity, by the number of photographers and designers from the Western Europe. For instance, one of the best examples of such work was the creative activity of the heritage of the founders and the apprentices of the German Bauhaus, who explored the mechanism of applying artistic principles for sharing relatively real to the human life. Yes, I understand. The final stage of the iconic term in the pre-war photography was characterized by the broad and radical expansion of the ideological discourse that resulted mainly in the systematic elaboration and the further application of the universal methods in culture, the goals of which were to fundamentally transform the social and the economical reality, either of the specific nation or of on the global scale. The totalitarian regions of new types, which evolved and gained power thanks to the results of the global economical and political instability, were ambitious enough to attempt to sanction and apply in actual practice the large-scale social projects, the main goal of which was to change the natural flow of history in accordance with the new principles of the dominant ideology. In the USSR, culture, the experiment of building socialism was supported by the concept of the new creative method, the socialist realism, the main goals of which was to strengthen the government's authority to agitate for the new Soviet ideology. And that is very crucial to maintain the production enthusiasm in the society without providing fair material compensation for worldly effort. And in context of the fact that the sphere of everyday commodities lacked enough funding. The concept of the socialist realism achieved the required scale of elaboration in the middle of the 30s and caused the inevitable change of all the levels of the photographic discourse, starting from the levels of the subject matter and means of creative expression, and to the level of photographic social structure and the place of photographer in the general system of visual production. The socialist realism was one of the first major examples in the history of the 20th century of the ways by which photography can be used by the government as a means of creating virtual reality, of ideology, which was far from becoming entirely introduced in the actual world. And the last slide. In this context, the convincing power, the economy, and the economy of the resources, and the speed of production typical of photographic technology became its key benefits and played the main role in the process of transformation of photography into the principal innovative and highly efficient ideological weapon, the use of mass media. So this is all I wanted to say.